is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Let's create an apprenticeship program. Engineers come and they study engineering. People go to trade schools and study a trade. Let's create a NBA or an NFL apprenticeship program where we're going to teach them financial literacy. We're going to teach them public relations. We're going to teach them all these things that you see guys in the NFL and guys in the NBA are failing at. Let's give them those tools.
Jay Paterno currently heads Blue Line 409 LLC, which runs ventures in business, television, radio, public speaking, and consults on philanthropy, social media, and public relations and marketing. Since 2020, he has consulted in college sports and notably was one of the nation's first consultants in the new era of name, image, and likeness for college student athletes. In 2022, he co-founded Penn State's NIL collective, Success with Honor, to coordinate NIL efforts for all of Penn State's 31 sports teams. Jay is the best-selling author of Paterno Legacy, Enduring Lessons from the Life and Death of My Father. He followed that up with the 2020 novel Hot Seat, a year inside college football's pressure cooker. And in September of 2024, he wrote Blitzed, the all-out pressure of college football's new era, the sequel to Hot Seat. Jay spent 22 seasons coaching, including 17 years on the Penn State staff. In March of 2011, he was named the Big Ten's best quarterbacks coach, while in 2008, he was recognized among the year's best offensive coordinators. Penn State's 2008 spread HD offense ranked in the top 10 in Big Ten history in yards, points, and scoring average. In 2017, he was elected to Penn State's Board of Trustees, receiving the highest number of votes among all candidates and was selected by 77% of all voters. Hey, Hoopheads, I wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Weston Jameson, men's basketball head coach at Harding University, and you're listening to the Hoopheads podcast.
Coaches, you've got a game plan for your team, but do you have one for your money? That's where Wealth for Coaches comes in. Each week, we'll deliver simple, no-fluff financial tips made just for coaches. Whether you're getting paid for camps, training sessions, or a full season, Wealth for Coaches helps you track it, save it, and grow it. It's time to stop guessing and start building. Subscribe now at wealthforcoaches.beehive.com/subscribe and follow us on Twitter at wealthforcoaches for daily money wins. Your money needs a coach. Start with Wealth for Coaches. Be prepared with a notebook and pen as you listen to this episode with Jay Paterno, member of the Penn State Board of Trustees and author of the book Blitzed, the all-out pressure of college football's new era. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here without my co-host Jason Sunkel tonight, but I am pleased to welcome from the world of football, Jay Paterno. Jay, welcome to the Hoopheads pod.
Good to be here.
Excited to have you on, Jay. Looking forward to diving into the wild and crazy world that is college athletics today in this new day and age with NIL and the portal and everything else that's going on. But want to start by going back to your experiences as a kid, growing up as the son of legendary Penn State football coach Joe Paterno, what that relationship was like, how that impacted you and your siblings in terms of athletics, and just tell me what it was like growing up in a household with a coach as famous as your dad.
Well, it's hard to compare it to anything else because it's the only thing I knew. But you know, it's like anything else in life. There were things that were really positive about it, and there were things that had drawbacks. So, you know, we got to experience a lot of things and have a lot of life experiences vicariously through what was going on at Penn State. Certainly, But at the same time, there were times where he was gone for 4 and 5 days. Back then, coaches weren't traveling around in private planes. They were in cars recruiting, and recruiting meant leaving Sunday night and coming back Thursday night, and then hosting recruits Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then leaving again, even for head coaches back then. So with everything, there were some really good things about it. But my mom did an unbelievable job kind of keeping the house together. My dad, when he was there, which was, it's not like I had an absentee dad, and it's not like he was deployed to the Middle East for 6 months at a time. So I don't want to sound like I'm whining, but I mean, there were times that he missed things. But when he was there, he was invested, and he was a great father, and set just some great examples for all of us, both myself and my two brothers and two sisters.
When you think about just your path through athletics and the impact that the influence of your dad and even your mom, what was your athletic experience like as a kid growing up with a father as famous as your dad?
Well, I remember, playing Little League baseball was the first time we really saw it. And, my dad would get to like one or two games out of the, 15 or 20 of them because, just there was, in May you're recruiting and things like that. But when he'd show up, all of a sudden there'd be this kind of buzz and people would be running over to him and everything. So he tried to stay away from it because he didn't want to draw away from us. Which was, it bothered him. Like he would say later on, he regretted doing that, but he also knew that he didn't want to become a distraction to not just me, but to the kids on my team and things like that. So, he was always cognizant of that. But my mom and dad's attitude towards athletics was, if you want to do it, do it. If you don't want to do it, don't think you have to do it because you're supposed to, or we want you to, or whatever. And I think that's, I had four kids that played college lacrosse, and I've taken that attitude with them all along. It's like, look, this is a 1-2, not a have to. And I think that parents, if there's one advice I would give to parents all the time, it's, if they want to do it, they'll do it. And my parents were that way with me. And it just happened to be, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play football, and I wanted to coach football, and I wanted to get into that kind of career for myself. And that just happened organically.
As you got more serious about the game of football, how much was your dad involved in your career in terms of guiding you, doing things with you on the field, trying to make you a better football player, let's say while you're in middle school, high school? How much influence is he having sort of on your development as a player?
He stayed completely out of it, which surprised me because he said, look, your coaches are doing their job. They're telling you what they want. I don't want you going in there and saying, well, my dad says this and my dad says that, because it's not fair to them. And he goes, they might know more about what you need than I do. But no, so he kind of stayed out of it. Other than just to say, it's funny because just in talking to parents of kids that are in youth sports and things, because I went to all these, these tournaments on the weekends for lacrosse, and you'd hear these parents getting in the kids' faces and whatever. And, in AAU basketball, I mean, we used to recruit guys that played both football and basketball, and you'd hear horror stories, from AAU basketball. And, they did some research in College of Health and Human Development here at Penn State. And one of the things they asked kids was, what do you want to hear from your parents after they watch you play? And they said, overwhelmingly, the answer was, I really enjoyed watching you play. Win or lose didn't matter. Competition didn't matter. Like, they wanted to know that you as a parent enjoyed seeing them play. And they said, that's just a lost art now. And my parents kind of took that approach with us.
It's a difficult one to take. I mean, I will say that I have kids who've played a variety of different sports, and I say this all the time, that I know what the right thing is to do, which is what you just exactly described. And yet at the same time, I know how difficult that sometimes can be, even for someone like myself or like you who kind of grew up around it and you know what that's like. It still sometimes is hard as a parent to dial it back and say, wow, I just wish that they would do X, or I think I can help them with Y. And yet, to your point, right? Most kids, especially not in the heat of the moment, they always say the car ride home, right, Jay? That's
Yeah.
the worst time. That's what kids dread, is they're going to get in the car with mom, or they're going to get in the car with dad, and they're just going to get critiqued, and it's not going to go the way that the kid anticipated or hoped that it would. And so I know in my own life, I've had to really be conscious of, I've got to dial that desire to give advice and critique and help in my mind to my kids. I really have to watch it and do that. And it sounds like your parents did a really good job of
Yeah.
modeling that for you. And then you were able to do that with your own kids. And I'm sure that passing along that legacy is a valuable one that I'm sure your kids certainly have appreciated, and they'll probably pass it along to theirs as well.
Yeah, and one of the four kids I have that played college across, one's still in college and plays goalie, and that is, oh my God, that is the worst. It's like you'd be happy if they never got a shot on goal, but they're got, but at the same token, you don't know how good he's going to be until he faces a lot of good shots. So like I'm always down by myself. I don't talk to anybody. I don't say a word. But like you said, the car ride home, we were at a tournament in Maryland when he was in high school, and it was one of those days, where you just, sometimes, golfers have a day where they can't keep it in the fairway, and goalie has a day in lacrosse where they just can't seem to find it. And he got in the car and I didn't say a word. He said, "You're not going to say anything?" I said, "No." I said, "We're going to go home and pretend this weekend never happened. If you're okay with that." He goes, "Yes, I'm okay with that, Dad."
It's so funny. When you talk about just going and watching the games and standing off in the corner, I always do that. That's what I want to sit away from people. I don't want to hear commentary. I just want to be alone by my thoughts. And then of course my wife a lot of times wants to sit by friends or other parents. And I'm like, do we really have to, it depends on which one of us is guiding the seating chart as to who gets to
Yeah.
make the decision about who sits where. And I'll tell you another funny story, Jay, that when I was a kid, or this is probably like 5-6 years ago, that I was talking to my dad, and I said, I really like going and watching my kids play, his grandkids play. And my dad said, yeah, he goes, "I really loved watching you play back when you were playing a long time ago." He said, "But in all honesty," he goes, "it was stressful. And once you weren't playing anymore, then we could just kind of go back to watching basketball games or watching a football game on TV or whatever, and just watch the game. And yeah, you might want a particular team to win, but you're not as invested as you are when it's your own kid." And I definitely have found that as much as I enjoy watching my kids play, there is a level of stress that I think people underestimate as a parent watching your own kid. There's obviously joy in it, but there's a lot of stress in it, as you said, where, man, if your kid's the goalie and balls are flying by him into the net, there's a part of you that just feels for them, and you feel that stress that maybe they don't even feel it because they're out there performing. It's just kind of like being a coach in some ways, right? The athletes are the ones out
Yeah.
on the field, and as a coach, you only have so much control. As a parent, you only have so much control. You have to cede that control to your kids.
Yeah. And that's not easy to do. No doubt.
All right, so talk about when you knew you wanted to be a coach. Was that something that, because of your dad, that even while you're playing, as you're going through the process of trying to be the best football player that you can be, did you always have in the back of your mind and know that coaching was a profession that you wanted to end up in? Or was that something that maybe you went the other way? You're like, "Oh, that was what my dad did. I don't want to follow in his footsteps." I don't know if there's a path, sort of a guide path that you followed.
I always knew, I always had the itch to coach. There's no question about it. And, I would never sit and watch a game without thinking, even when I was in, middle school, high school, it was always, and back then it was film. So if I heard my dad's projector going in his office at home, I was always, scurrying in there to see what he was watching. The screens back then were about this big. They reflected off a mirror to the screen, and it was black and white, and they'd have that little clicker, and it would, and if I heard that, I would go running in. And when I was a kid, when I was little, I would just kind of sit on the floor because it was, and play with my toys and stuff. But then as I got older, I started to sit in a chair where I could watch what was going on. And as I got a little older, I started to ask questions. And so I always kind of had that itch. There were other things I thought about doing over time, anything from law school to going to TV or writing or whatever. And some of that's come to fruition now. But I mean, that was always the first love. And once I got older and started to understand what college coaching was really about, it became something I really want to be a part of because it was a chance to not everybody sees the game day and the excitement and the give and take and the play calling and that stuff is great. It's awesome. It's an adrenaline rush like nothing else in the world. But what really matters and what really is satisfying is when you see those guys come in right out of high school. They're hot shots. They think they've got all the answers. And within 2 or 3 weeks, they realize they don't have any of the answers. And then over time, they get to the point where they have all the answers again. It's kind of fun to watch that process. And, there are guys that I coached over the years that, you know, became better people because of their experience at Penn State or wherever else I was coaching, James Madison, UConn, UVA, whatever it was. That was very, very rewarding. And that ultimately is what it's all about. And I think that's really the thing that I think we're starting to lose in college sports, big time college sports, particularly men's basketball and football. And I think that's unfortunate because those are the things, and I think the people that maintain that in their programs are the ones that ultimately are going to have the enduring long-term success. I think you look at a guy like Ryan Day at Ohio State is doing that. Marcus Freeman's doing that. I think Lanning's doing it. And I'm just going to name, I'm probably going to forget. But when you look at basketball, Tom Izzo certainly is doing that. And I think last year they overachieved in everybody's mind. But I think part of it's because he's building something that kids, they are committed to. And I think that was what really drew me to coaching was ultimately that's why I wanted to stay in it was because of that.
Did you understand that before you actually became a coach? Was that something that was clear through your interactions with your dad and your conversations with him? Did you clearly understand that before you actually got into the profession, or was that something that you learned slowly over time as you got into it?
I had some sense of it because there were when I was on the team, there were kids in the team that came from disadvantaged backgrounds and things, and I was able to, as a teammate, be part of their changing their lives a little bit, by befriending them and things like that. Um, And so I learned some of that, but it wasn't until you're a coach where you have a kid walk into your office and they've got a real problem at home and you've got to help them weave through it. Or I had a kid I recruited at Penn State and, I got a call from his mom, and this is back before everybody had cell phones. So the mom called me and it was, his brother had been in an accident and lost both of his legs below the knees. And I had to go tell him and, get him, find him on campus and pull him in and tell him, or he had a player who was somebody, a parent died or whatever it was, and you have to get him out of class and then get him home. Those kind of things. And you're that person, you're that front person. Until you go through that, you don't really realize how important that role is. And I think that's something you learned after I got into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that until you're really in the job, you can envision it, right? You can think about it, you can kind of understand that it's an important piece of it, but until you really get into those relationships and understand how important you are and how important that coach's role is in an athlete's life, you don't know 100% for sure. And I think, as you said a minute ago, that's one of the things that when I talk to coaches here on the podcast, Jay, what I hear from them is that typically, if you go back through the history of college sports, in most cases, right, a athlete gets recruited, whether you're football, basketball, whatever, and the majority of those athletes end up staying at the same place for 4 years. And so you have, as a coach, 4 years to be able to build that relationship with your players and to be able to have the kind of impact like what you were just describing. And I think what coaches are struggling with now, just again from their conversations with me, is in a lot of cases now you have a much shorter window to be able to have that same sort of impact that you described. And so coaches are trying to wrestle with and figure out, how can I still impact kids in the same way that I did before, but do it over a much shorter time period? And they're trying to figure that out. So I don't know if that's a conversation that you've had with any of the people in the football world in terms of just, again, building those relationships and trying to have the impact on those people in their program, not just as players on the field, but being able to actually impact their lives as human beings. So what have your conversations in that area sounded like? And what are you hearing in terms of that from football coaches?
Well, there's a lot of frustration. There's no question about it because you're getting you put a lot of effort to recruit a kid. They get there all of a sudden now, you're and this is football. I mean, the women's volleyball coach here at Penn State is a close friend, and she's even they're even dealing with agents and recruiting. And that's been going on for 2 years where the kid comes on the recruit to visit, and it's like I really like it, but you got to talk to my agent. We got negotiations. And so from the right off the bat, there is a level of distrust that everybody, football coaches are dealing with it, and certainly at a very high, much more high profile level than maybe women's volleyball, for example. But that sport's growing now. But you're starting out with a business relationship in what is supposed to be an education relationship, and that's very difficult to do. And I think what coaches are struggling with is I want to be honest with kids. This is what we're about. This is what we stand for. But if I take that stance and maybe I'm too honest with them, they may not like what they hear and leave. And I think some of the coaches that have a better foundation and maybe feel they're a little safer and have more job security can take that approach. The guys that know, hey, I might be on the hot seat and I better win this year or else I got to maybe fudge some things and get some guys in here and win short term so that I can develop what I am. I think the most important thing if you want to endure is to know who you are, have that core set of values and lay that out in the recruiting process. I think one of the things that, we just hired Matt Campbell at Penn State to be the head football coach. One of the things he said that is very, very encouraging is I'm interested in developing people over time, interested in, I want to get kids, certainly I'm paraphrasing the quote, but I'm pretty much right on in terms of what he said, in terms of, if it's only financial, if that's the only reason you're here, this probably isn't the place for you. And that's kind of the approach we had when I coached at Penn State, and certainly my dad for 46 years. We had a big time running back in the state of Pennsylvania. And everybody said you got to recruit. And the kid came up on his visit, and Joe said, "Look, you know what we're about. You know what." And Joe said, "Look, I'm not here to give you some used car sales pitch." And the kid says, "Well, I want the sales pitch." And Joe proceeds to say, "Well, you have to go to study hall 4 nights a week as a freshman. You have to go to mandatory breakfast every day, Monday through Friday, whether you have class early or not. You got to go to mandatory breakfast. If you skip class, you won't play." And he's laying out all these rules. And the kid walks out of the room, and I was recruiting coordinator at the time, and he goes, "How'd you think that went?" I go, "I don't think that was the sales job he's looking for." But my dad looked at me and he said, "If he's the right kid, if this isn't what he wants, we're better off knowing that now, and he's better off knowing that now." So I think that's the balancing act. This is what our program is, but I got to balance that with what, can I be successful and and I think that's going to be the important challenge for every coach.
Yeah, that's kind of a universal coaching truth when you really think about it, right? That kind of transcends almost eras in terms of, if I'm a coach, right, I have to have the standards and principles that my program is built upon. And maybe those look slightly different today than they might have 10 years ago. But whatever they are, I have to continue to stand on those. And if a particular kid, from a character standpoint or from a demand standpoint or whatever it may be, if that kid doesn't fit into those principles, those standards, then yeah, it's probably best that we find that out as quickly as possible so we can both go our separate ways. And I do think that that's something that, again, when I think about truths that I've learned here on the podcast, the number of people that have told me that if I'm a head coach, I have to be able to make decisions that I can live with, that I can rest my head on the pillow at night when I go to sleep and know that I made the best decision for my program and for the success of us collectively as a group. And it's when you start listening to outside influences or being affected by a demand that a kid or an agent might have, and you start sort of bending yourself to fit that, that's when you start to get into trouble. And so I think the best coaches, again, we're talking at any level, any sport, they have a way of doing things. They have a set of standards that they believe in, and they expect the people who are coming into their program to fit into those standards as opposed to vice versa. We're going to bend the way we are to accommodate this kid just because they have great talent or they're bring something to the table that we need, if that makes sense.
I think the biggest mistake, especially in the college level, that coaches make is we have to get this guy. This guy's the 5-star. He's in state. We got to get this guy. And, I've spent a lot of time with Urban Meyer over the years. And, if you talk to Urban Meyer about how things were in Florida versus how he ran his program in Ohio State, very, very different. Because he felt like in Florida, and he would tell you this if he was sitting here, the pressure to recruit certain kids and to get certain kids from boosters. If you don't sign this kid, whereas at Ohio State, he took a different approach. And there are some kids that I know that they walked away from that were high profile recruits that never went to Ohio State and those kids went to other schools and never beat them. Because he just knew what his program was about. And part of that's exactly how, my dad used to say, look, if we got to sell our soul to win some games, then I'm going to get out of the business because I don't want to do that. And I think but there are so many players out there that are good enough to win with and good enough to win championships with. They're more than we think. And anybody, I say this all the time, and it's a leadership lesson. I'm working on a book on leadership, and one of the chapters is about building rosters versus building teams. Anybody can build a roster, and you're seeing that in the NIL era. You can throw all the money around you want. You can build an unbelievable roster, but can you mold that into a team that genuinely cares about each other and will compete for each other, and trust each other? And that's really what it comes down to.
Well, along those lines, we are seeing in the world of college football probably one of the most incredible and improbable stories as we head into. We're sitting here prior to the national championship game being played, but what Coach Cignetti has done at Indiana, a program that basically has been and also ran for almost the entirety of its existence, and now to have turned it into a complete juggernaut in such a short time speaks to what you just talked about, right? Is there are lots of different ways that you can build a roster, but clearly what he's done is build a team. So from what you know and what you've seen and from people that you've talked to, what has been the key to that turnaround, and maybe apply that sort of again to when thinking about this as a basketball podcast? What are some things that if I'm a coach listening, whether I'm a high school coach, I'm a college coach, what can I take away from what Cignetti's done to turn that program around that I could apply in my own coaching situation?
I think number one, he has, and I think everybody can see this, he has supreme confidence in what he's doing. He's prepared. He knows that when it comes down to it on game day, he's not, no one's going to outcoach him in terms of because they're more prepared than he is. I think that's number one. Number two, I think when he went into Indiana, he has a group of coaches around him. I think he brought 7 guys from his JMU staff. So immediately they hit the ground running where they knew each other. They know how they run practices, how they, we're going to spend X amount of time on these drills and X amount of time on these drills. And this is how we approach things in September and October, November, January, all year round. So I think that helped. He also brought in a number of guys with him from James Madison who were not only talented football players, but they also then became kind of, almost like translators, like he's coming in speaking a different language with some of these guys when you establish a new program. And he's got 15, 20 guys. He's got 7 coaches and 15 to 20 players that can say, well, this is why we do this and this is why we do that. And oh yeah, when he gets yelling, there's all kinds of things like that where I think that helped. But he has established what he does and he's confident in what he does. And it has succeeded everywhere he's been. So I think that's been the biggest key is when you come in. I think one of the most interesting things he did was he got introduced to the basketball game. And he says, and I know Purdue sucks. And everybody cheers. But then he said, but so do Ohio State and Michigan, who were the standard bearers in that program. And everybody around the country went, wow, this guy, but it was a signal to the people in that community and to the guys he was coaching. We fear no one. And I think that's really been the attitude that he's had. Before the season, you look at the preseason polls, Indiana, I think, was 21st in the AP poll, 20th or 21st. Given what they had coming back, if they were an SEC team, they would have been top 7. Coming out of a playoff year and getting a really good transfer. Now, nobody knew Mendoza was going to be as good as he was, but he was a really good quarterback at Cal, so they got a good transfer portal. If he's an SEC brand name program, he's probably preseason 7 or 8. But he's 21st because they're Indiana. And he got those guys to understand it doesn't matter what it says in front of your shirt. Okay, don't get fooled by all that stuff. And they took that to heart. Even games where they came to our place and barely beat us. But when it came down to it, the last drive, his players knew what they needed to do. They made the plays they had to make, and they were missing 3 or 4 really good starters. And they went down the field and won the game. And I said, that team is going to be really, really hard to kill. I mean, and it all comes from his attitude and his leadership, I think, has been what's really set it apart.
I love the idea that you shared there. And I think it's one that is tremendously underrated when I think about great coaches. And that's the combination of confidence and preparedness. And I think if you have those two things, they go hand in hand, right? If you're prepared, you're much more likely to be confident. But I know that, and I can speak to this just in my own experiences, where there are times where I feel like, hey, I've really got a handle on what I'm going to do. And this, just boiling it down to like just a practice. So I'm running a youth basketball practice, and there's days where I had a busy day and I'm throwing together the practice plan 2 minutes before I walk in the door. And what's my level of confidence in that practice plan? It's not super high because I haven't put a lot of thought into it. I haven't put a lot of effort into it. Conversely, on days when I've got it all planned out, I know exactly what I want to teach. I know exactly how I want to teach it. I know what I'm going to do. I go in there prepared, and my team has a much better practice. And again, that's taking a much bigger concept and taking it down to a smaller level. But I do think that when you talk about a coach being ultra prepared, right, and knowing exactly what they want to do, how they want to do it, what do we want to do on offense, what do we want to do on defense, and obviously then you can break it down as far as you want to get it broken down to. When you have confidence in what you're doing, you have confidence in what your staff knows and can teach it, because again, as you said, they've been with you. All of a sudden, that confidence and that ability to be prepared starts to trickle down to the players. And then that leads to the next thing, which is the belief, right? So the coach has the confidence, but then the players have to believe in that coach. And one of the ways that you build that belief, in my mind, is you have every answer to a question that a player might ask, like, hey, on this play, this is what happened. What should I have done, or what should I have been looking for? And if you're prepared, you know those answers. And the more your players see that you have those answers when they're looking for them, and more you can give them the why, especially in today's world, I just think it causes everybody to start to gel and come together in such a way that all of a sudden everyone's looking around going, hey, we got everything we need here. We got all the answers in our coaching staff and in ourselves as we continue to build that confidence. And I think that's just what's happened with Indiana. I mean, obviously there's a baseline level of talent that you have to have, but man, you just see it. You see it on their sideline. You see it in Cignetti's face. You see it in his words. It's really been just an incredible turnaround that I don't think anybody could have ever seen coming.
No, and I think that's, people underestimate. Everybody talks about Iverson when he said practice. We're talking about practice. And I have friends of mine that are 76ers fans, and they talk about Iverson, and no disrespect because Iverson's an unbelievable basketball player. But I said, how many titles did he win? I said, you never heard Michael Jordan belittle how important practice was. There's a guy who prepared in practice, and that's why he won 6 titles. To me, I love LeBron. I saw him in 9th grade because he was a great football player. But I'll take Michael Jordan over him any day, simply because when it came time to be the kill or be killed, that guy always was ready to kill somebody. But I mean, look, LeBron, I'd take him tomorrow. But at the end of the day, Michael Jordan every story you hear about him, and everything you know about him, and even in the whole Last Dance, that what they call documentary, where he at the end he's like, I know I was hard on people, but I never asked anybody to do something I wouldn't do myself.
Yep.
And that always stuck with me. And, and the same should be said of coaches. Coaches should be willing to not ask players to do things they themselves won't do in terms of commitment and preparedness. And and if you're not confident, and you know this, if you're even the slightest bit not confident, players will smell it. Your guys can smell it; they know it,
Yep.
and they will react accordingly.
There's no question about that. I think that it's certainly an underrated aspect of leadership, right? Is that you have to be able to set that example. You have to demonstrate your commitment. If you want your guys to be in the weight room at 6 a.m., well, guess what? You better be there at 6 a.m. just like they are, going there and being a part of it. And I think it's something that I think a lot of young coaches sometimes forget that, hey, you've got to make that same commitment that you're asking your players. I often have the conversation of, we ask our players to get better in the off season, but then as coaches, what do we do to get better in the off season? Are we studying film? Are we trying to read more leadership books? What are we doing to try to grow ourselves as leaders? And I think that's a really important piece of being a great coach at whatever sport, whatever level that we're talking about. And then to go back to your point about Jordan, I just think that the word that I always use with people when you watch Michael Jordan, it always just felt like it was inevitable. Like you might get him in a game, in a series, or he might lose here or there, but the guy was just going to keep coming and keep coming and keep coming, and just the mental toughness that he had, and which can't, again, goes back to, right, like you talked about, the effort that he put forth in practice, and how hard he worked during times where the lights were off, so that when the lights were on, he was ready and he was able to come after you in such a way that, just, again, there's nobody ever in the history of the game that's had his combination of physical tools and skill and mental toughness. Those three things to me just set him apart all time as the greatest basketball player. I don't even think it's remotely close when you just start factoring in those three pieces.
Well, I'll tell you,
Anybody who argues LeBron, and again, don't get me wrong, LeBron was here in Cleveland. I love LeBron. He's a great player. But if you watched both of those guys play, if you were around for Michael Jordan and you could watch him and have watched him live in the moment, there's no comparison. But that's a that's an argument that is people love to have. And I just say, if you saw both of them and you think LeBron is the better player, I don't know what to tell you. You're wrong.
well, if I'm drafting first, I'm taking Jordan. And if I'm drafting second, I'm taking LeBron, and I'm happy as hell. And if I'm drafting third, I'll take Bill Russell. But I'll tell you a funny story about Michael Jordan, because I've gotten to know Phil Knight over the years. He's a family friend. So the year the Bulls were playing Portland in the NBA Finals. Obviously, Beaverton, Oregon, Nike's headquarters is 20 minutes from downtown Portland, whatever it is. And they have a campus there, and it's an unbelievable setup. They have offices, but they have all these basketball gyms and fields, and they have IM leagues and everything. It's almost like going to college. I'm like, this is like fantasy camp for grown-ups. So anyway, so the night before they're playing, I don't know if it was game 6 or whatever it was, they're in Portland. And Jordan, all these North Carolina guys, Sam Perkins, his teammates, guys that were in the NBA at the time, are all up there. So they go over to Nike's headquarters. Jordan, this is the guy that's in the NBA Finals. And they get shoes and stuff, whatever, they're going to play some pickup basketball. And they pull 2 Nike employees, like, anybody here any good at basketball? So 2 Nike employees run with these guys. They play for hours. And these are NBA players. Jordan, this is the night before an NBA Finals game, because he loved the game so much. And they said it was so intense. It was unbelievable. And they're like, this guy's out of his mind. He could get hurt. Next night, goes out, scores a boatload of points. They win the game. And it was like, there's a guy just had an unbelievable passion for the game, unbelievable passion for competition, and it meant the world to him.
I always think about that love for the game clause that he had put in his contract, that they could never stop him from going and playing pickup games wherever he wanted to go, and wherever and whenever he wanted to play pickup basketball, he was allowed to play pickup basketball just as a part of his contract. They couldn't prevent him, and yeah, he just. I mean, a very, very unique, again, individual, just from a standpoint of, like I said, I don't think there's anybody who's had his combination of skill level, gifts, and just mental toughness beyond. Like, you can point to games that he lost, and yeah, his team lost, but I defy you to find me the game where Jordan had 12 points and shot 2 for 20, and his team lost. Like, when they lost, he still was there. So anyway, we could talk.
Well, I think, when you look at it, you talk about Jordan. I think one of the lessons about whether it's Jordan or Tom Brady, those guys, most of the guys you see that have risen to that level, it wasn't easy for them. And I think that's the thing that in the transfer portal age, we're losing with kids. It's like, it's mostly, well, if you go somewhere else, you'll play right away. I'll root for Arch Manning right now next year, unless he plays Penn State, because I love the message he has sent. I'll go sit for 2 years. I'll learn. I'll get better. I don't have to go to the quarterback at Oregon this year came and sat behind Dylan Gabriel for a year until he get his time. So I think, you learn from adversity. I think we try as parents to try and prevent adversity. There's a guy I used to coach with, Bill Kenny, had a thing on his desk. You say, prepare the child for the path, don't prepare the path for the child. And I think that's important. And I think the transfer portal, we're seeing more of the let's bulldoze the path.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I think that it is definitely a downside of the portal when you think about just the lessons that you try to instill in your own kids, right? Of not everything's always going to go exactly the way you want to. It's not always going to be easy. It's not going to be perfect. Sometimes there's something that you have to struggle through. And you think about yourself as an adult, right? It's always that old saying of anything worth having is worth struggling through to be able to get, right? The goals that everybody wants, everybody wants them, but nobody wants to do the work in order to get there. And so doing the work is ultimately what gives you the satisfaction of having achieved that goal. And in a lot of ways, I think the portal is taking that away. And we're starting to see that trickle down to even to the high school level. And I think, unfortunately, for the last probably 10 years, it's been a part of AAU basketball where you're on this team and it's not going well, and then you're jumping to that team. And we see it with high school basketball now more than ever. I think probably high school football is the same way, where you got these kids that have played at 3 or 4 high schools, and then they get to college, and yeah, it's not surprising that they end up at 2 or 3 or 4 different schools over the course of their career as they're chasing who knows what. And then again, we don't know who's giving them advice, right? Is it their parent? Is it their club team coach? Is it their position coach from high school? Is it their agent? And who knows? Talk a little bit about the agent piece of it, because this is something that I find fascinating that I don't know a ton about. But obviously, if you're an agent at the professional level, you have to be sanctioned by the NBA or Major League Baseball or the NFL to be able to represent players, which I'm assuming gives you at least a bare minimum of qualifications that you have to have in order to be able to represent players. But on the college landscape today, those guidelines or those parameters aren't in place. So what's it like out there in terms of agents? And you even talked about on the volleyball side that you got women's volleyball players coming with agents. So what does the agent landscape look like from people that you've talked to and what you've seen?
Well, there's no governance. I think the biggest mistake right now in college athletics is that right now, the NCAA, conference commissioners, presidents, athletic directors, coaches. Now I'm on the board of trustees at Penn State, so I'm trying to spur some of these conversations with trustees and regents at other schools right now about trying to get some sort of at our level, because we have the fiduciary responsibility to universities. So if this all craters, we're the ones that are going to have to sort through the rubble to figure out where we are fiscally. So we're having some conversations about, there needs to be a overarching governance. Right now, if a kid signs a contract with a school and then turns around 3 days later, someone sign with another one, who do you turn that into? The NCAA is not going to touch it. So there's been this complete lack of anything controlling college athletics. So when you talk about the agent side, there's no collective bargaining. There's no players union that's saying this agent certified, that agent certified. Because certainly, as you mentioned, the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, those agents all have to be certified. They have to file contracts with the union so people all know what they're charging certain people, all these kind of things. So there's a transparency, there's an awareness that is not in college sports right now, and there's no barrier to entry to being an agent. I could be an agent. If there was a big time college football player down in my neighborhood, I could go and say, I'm going to be your agent, and I'm going to charge X amount. And just to show you how some of this agent stuff is gone, you know, a lot of these agents in the early first couple of days of NIL. Now, if you're a high profile player, you've got CAA or you've got somebody coming in and you're with a high profile agent who's established as an NFL agent. That's different. But for a lot of other guys, they're not getting that guy. And what these guys have been doing, because it's NIL money, not revenue sharing money, they're saying I'm a marketing agent, which means I charge you 20% or 15%. If I'm your employment contract agent, now you're talking 3-4%. So some of them may sign these deals where they were marketing agents, even though it was pay to play. And we can call it NIL all we want. Now with revenue sharing, that's changed some, but still, that's all. It's a very, very murky world, and as such, a lot of people are getting taken advantage of early on in this process, and like, at some point, the adults in the room have to stand up and say, it's time we put together a proposal for what college athletics should look like with some things that will start to get this all regulated to protect the players as well as the schools. Until we do that, we're putting kids at risk.
Do you think that the NCAA is reluctant to stand up to some of the things that have gone on that most people would agree are not in the best interest of really anyone in the game, at least not the long-term interest, right? It might be in my short-term interest to sign a $30,000 deal with some unscrupulous agent, whatever. But as far as long-term health of college athletics, do you think it's because the NCAA is afraid, and maybe rightfully so, that any time that they get sued in court, that they're probably going to lose the lawsuit? Do you think that that's probably the main reason why they're not willing at this point to step in and sort of regulate what's going on?
I think that's part of it. I think it's really two-pronged. Number one, it's everything we have in place now is because of a lawsuit. And it's only a matter of time till the next lawsuit changes. Like right now, we have the House settlement with the NCAA. That's essentially, we don't call it a labor market, but let's be honest, it's a labor market. That's what regulates the labor market right now. That's why there's a revenue share cap. It's only a matter of time until the next big player, their family says, well, wait a minute, I don't want to be subject to your salary cap. I wasn't part of the House settlement. I'm going to sue, and they're going to win. I mean, it's very clear that's going to happen. So that's part of it. The other part of it is football is driving this bus in a lot of ways, because that's where the biggest money right now is in football. And so that's driving conference real. Why are UCLA and USC in Oregon and Washington, the Big Ten? Football. They need the football money. And it's unfortunate because it destroyed an incredible athletic league and basketball league in the Pac-12. I mean, God rest his soul, Bill Walton. I mean, I loved listening to that guy. I'd stay up to listen to that guy called Pac-12 games because it was kind of exciting to see UCLA. But anyway, it's driving all this stuff. So the commissioners of the Big Ten and the SEC are holding everybody else hostage. And I say that as a trustee of a member of a Big Ten school, not to be critical, but that's their job, is to get as much money as they can for their member institutions to give them a competitive advantage over the ACC or over the Big 12 or over whoever else it may be, or the SEC if we can get more money. And so between the lawsuits and the power that those conference commissioners wield right now, the NCAA is really kind of powerless to do anything And I think that's why, it's going to take governing boards and universities to say, wait a minute, we got to find a better path on this. And then I think we're trying to put the cart before the horse. We're saying Congress, there's a lot of talk about Congress needs to pass some laws. Well, we really should be telling them what we need. And when I say that, I said we should be sitting down, not just with coaches, athletic directors, players should be there. I mean, look, we're going to need collective bargaining at some point. I hate to say it. I'm an old school guy, but let's just call it what it is. And, we've got a 12-team playoff in college football. And so everyone, let's go to 16. Let's go to 24. Well, maybe players don't want to play 6 more games, because they don't want to get hurt. I mean, everybody would, all the fans want to see the March Madness expanded. I mean, I do too, because we're always on the outside. I want to expand it so that every school gets in. So, but I mean, that's not good for the players. It's not good for the game. And, coaches aren't the ones that they're taking the shots or getting hurt and bruised and beaten and battered. And, the players have to be part of the solution as well.
When you look out 5 years, and I guess I think of it in terms of looking back 5 years and not in any way, shape, or form being able to imagine that when the original Ed O'Bannon lawsuit comes in and he's really trying to get money for what was at that time name, image, likeness, which has sort of been perverted, for lack of a better way of saying it, from what the original intent of that was. But you go back 5 years, and certainly nobody could have projected sitting here where we are today with the way that college athletics looks. So if we look out another 5 years, how do you think this thing shakes out, or how do you hope it shakes out? What do you think it eventually is going to look like? I know you mentioned collective bargaining. I think clearly that's probably going to be a part of it. But what are some of the key tenets that you think we're going to be standing on 5 years from now?
Well, you said what I hope. What I hope would be like we maintain this academic part of it. I really hope we do. Because otherwise it's not college sports. We're AAA football or AAA basketball, whatever it is. But I think what's coming is certainly there's going to have to be an acknowledgement of reality. I mean, you can sit here and say we're not an amateur athletics endeavor anymore. We as universities are running sports, professional sports franchises on our campuses. There's just no two ways about it. So we may as well be honest about what we are. So to that extent, we're going to have to acknowledge it. We have employees. I think that I would like to see a 2-track approach on this thing where kid you recruit out of high school, you say, look, we can do this one of 2 ways. If you want to sign a 4-year contract and you want to pursue a legitimate degree, we're going to give you room, board, books, and tuition. We'll also give you some revenue share. We'll give you some NIL money, but you're going to sign a 4-year contract with, if there are things reasons you want to transfer, then we have a conversation where we have to mutually agree to what that looks like. And now if I'm a parent and I got a 4-year deal, my kid's college is paid for and they can't cut my kid after a year or 2, I'm going to take that deal every time. Or you say to someone, look, let's be honest about what you just want to be a 2 or 3, 1 year in basketball, 3 years in football. Okay, well, let's talk about what that looks like. And if you're not really interested in school, why are we wasting a professor's time with you taking up class? Why are we wasting tuition dollars? Let's create an apprenticeship program like we would for any other. Engineers come and they study engineering. People go to trade schools and study a trade. Let's create a NBA or an NFL apprenticeship program where we're going to teach them financial literacy. We're going to teach them public relations. We're going to teach them all these things that kids, you see guys in the NFL and guys in the NBA are failing at. Let's give them those tools. Now, if they come through and they're not good enough, well, that you chose that path. So, that's not on us. That's on you. But, but I think you're going to need contracts that protect the player as well as protect the school. Because what you're seeing now is, coaches are cutting kids, and you're seeing thousands of kids go in the portal and not all of them are getting picked up. And so I think there's an imbalance there, but I think we're going to have kind of a dual track. And I think we're going to have reimagine some of the things we do and the way we bring kids in. I mean, the guys that are coming to your school as grad transfers in football, they never see the inside of a classroom. They sign up for 6 credits online. That's it. And then they go to the building and they're pros. I mean, so let's stop pretending that we're something we're not. And I say that as a guy who has been altruistic, has loved the amateur model and what it can do for young people, but I'm also a realist. And I also understand, you know, if St. John's goes to play Michigan State in basketball and those players walk off the court right before the game, I know Patino and I know Tom Izzo. I'm not going to sit there and watch them play cornhole. If the players walk off the field, and no one's going to televise it. Gus Johnson could probably make that interesting, but I mean, no one's going to sit around and pay the kind of money they're paying for those media rights to watch those guys play cornhole. So I mean, the reality is I understand why the Big Ten gets a $1.1 billion media rights contract annually. $1.1 billion. It's because those players are out there putting it on the line. So I'm just being realistic about where we are. It kills me, but it's realist. We got to be realistic about where we are.
How difficult is that conversation going to be to move it to a place where university presidents, boards of trustees are able to come to that reality that you've come to where, hey, the model that we might have dreamed of or that was a part of what we were doing 15, 20 years ago, which wasn't perfect, but clearly there was a lot more. Student athletes had to be students for the most part at most universities. How do you get people who, again, have presumably spent their entire life in education and have gone into the field and have risen to that point in their profession to accept that two-track, hey, yeah, we got some student athletes over here, but over here we have, yeah, we're kind of educating them towards what they say is going to be their career. But we all know the reality when kids come out of high school, and we talked about it a little earlier, who are they getting advice from? Who's telling them that, hey, you're going to be an NFL player or you're going to be an NBA player? We know that the odds of you making it, even if you're playing football at Penn State, right? So you're coming out of high school, you're the best of the best if you're getting an opportunity to play football at Penn State. Of a typical roster, how many of those guys in a given year are going and playing in the NFL? The number is pretty small. And so I would bet that when kids come out of high school, you're going to have those two tracks and they're going to be relatively even though the odds of everybody making it. So what do the conversations look like? And how do you get to the point where all those people who have been in education, how difficult is it going to be for them to accept that two track? Because I think you're right. I just don't know how we get there.
Yeah. I've been on the board of trustees for Penn State now almost 9 years. So 5-6 years ago, when California started talking about NIL, we had a conversation in the board meeting. The president of the university got up and said, it's just going to be, a local car dealer puts a guy on a billboard, and I'm sitting there going, you guys have no idea where this is going. You have no idea where it's going. And I was one of the guys. 4 or 5 years ago, Penn State didn't have a collective. And I got together with another trustee and a handful of other people and said, let's put together a collective. Now, as trustees, we couldn't put money into it. We could set it up, put it in motion, and then we had to walk away from it. We couldn't control it. So we did that. But we knew then that there were two types of NIL. There was what we called synthetic NIL, and there was real NIL. There's Caitlin Clark, and State Farm says, you know what, we want her a commercial because we think there's a return on investment. And she's got a national profile. And then you had other collectives that were giving kids $50,000 to tweet 2 hours a month, essentially making 1,500 a month, 1,200, whatever the number is, an hour. Which in the book BLITZED, there's a point where the head coach says, let me get this straight. You set up a collective to pay our players to promote the collective, to raise money to pay our players to promote the collective, to raise. Isn't that money laundering? And they're like, oh, that's an ugly word, But I mean, so we got to that point. So I was talking about that 5-6 years ago simply because I know how coaches are. We spend all of our life looking for loopholes. That's it. They're playing this defense. How do I get around it? They put up these recruiting rules. It doesn't say I can't do this. So let's do that. So I knew that those things were happening. 4 years ago, when we were renewing our football coach's contract, I sent an email to the chair of our board, and I said, look, are we putting anything in there in the event that revenue sharing comes? Because the Alston case had just been settled. And Justice Kavanaugh went on to say that the business model was flatly would be illegal in anywhere else in America. And I said, we're going to get revenue sharing. And they thought I was out of my mind. So, these conversations, it moves at a snail's pace. I think the pace with which it's moving now, they've all got whiplash. I'm not shocked by it, only because I know that every case is going to go the athlete's way. The media has taken the side of the athletes. Nobody is sitting around talking about how hard it is, and we're at a point now where even at a school like Penn State, we're in the top 10 in athletic department revenues in the country. We were at a break-even level before revenue sharing kicked in. Even we were right at, some years we'd lose 200 grand on, we're talking 210, $12 million in revenues. Some years we'd make $1 million, some years we'd lose $1 million, but we were right on the razor's edge every year. And now you talk about 20.5 in revenue sharing. Where does that come from? So the conversation can be very difficult in terms of, we may have to start reconfiguring coaches' salaries because if we got to pay players, that money's got to come from somewhere. The size of staffs. Look at the benches on basketball. There's more guys working for those players on the bench than there are players. And it's the same thing with football. You're looking at, football staffing now. My last year coaching at Penn State, we had 30 guys roughly, 30 people working with our team. They're 90. Some of these schools have 90 guys working for them now in football and growing. And so at some point, all this AI and all this analytics and stuff was supposed to make it easier, yet we keep adding people. So if all this stuff is being done, we should need less people than more people. But the answer for every coach and every athletic director is more people. Oh, we've got to do this, so we need more people. I mean, a video department in one school went, for football, 15 years ago, you're looking at 3 guys to video practice. And all 3 of them had to go up in high lifts. It's one thing you don't have in basketball is you're not outside in a high lift, 70 feet in the air filming practice. But that's all done now with drones and cameras that are on poles. So you look at some of these video departments, they've got 12, 15 guys. You go, what are they all doing? So we're going to have really hard conversations to manage the budgets of athletics. When you look at what's going on, you have schools that have instituted involuntary student activity fees for the student population at large, whether they care about athletics or not. That money's being funneled to the athletic department to prop these things up. So we have to have really hard conversations about this. And I'm more than happy, and I engage them on a regular basis, not just with people at our school, but people at other schools. And it's coming. I mean, it's going to happen.
What do you hear from boosters and alumni who previously might make donations to an athletic department or a specific program and say, hey, this money is earmarked for new turf in the practice facility, or we want to help fund the uniforms next year or whatever. And now, like, I'll hear from guys that played at Kent where I played basketball, and there's the collective, like you talked about, and just, again, schools are always asking for donations. And a lot of guys I talk to, they're like, before when I gave money, I knew where it was going and it was something tangible that I could see. Maybe it was paying for players' books for the year, whatever it was. Now it feels like you're just paying a kid's salary who you don't know if that kid is even going to contribute anything on the court or on the field. And so I don't know if you're hearing any of that in your role from boosters and alumni, or where that stands sort of in the relationship between the players, the university, the alumni. How is that interplay happening as you see it in the landscape today?
Well, donor fatigue is real. I mean, it is. You keep going back to the same guys every year and saying, you got to help us fund our payroll, fund our payroll, fund our payroll. The coach Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State made a statement back in December about, there's got to be somebody in this community who can write a $20 million check. And not to be critical, because he's right, but that's not a one-off. You need that 20 million every year. And that's what nobody's realizing. And I think one of the things that's a real possibility on the horizon is the guy that keeps writing you $2 million checks and $3 million checks, that's not getting donors to cover your payroll is not a business model. And so there's going to need to be a recalculation and calibration of what the business model in college athletics looks like. And until we do that, you're going to have donors that go, you're back again, enough, and the kind of people that can write those checks, they didn't get to have that kind of money because they just gave money away. And you're gonna look at them, start to look at this differently, and say, and it's already happened. You have guys that are saying, "Well, I want to look at film. I want to see film of this guy because I think I know what I'm looking at," even though they don't most of the time. That's already happened. You have situations now where you're going to start to say, I kid everybody about, FP, all these acronyms, NIL, NLI, CFP, all these different things. I said, you better get used to hearing ROI. I said, because people are going to want to see a return on investment. So if I pay $1 million to get you a wideout or to get you a pass rusher, and that guy isn't as good as you said he was, I've been shooting my mouth off up in the suites during the game about I paid for that guy and that's my guy and the guy's not any good and now I look like a jackass. Or they say return on investment like, hey, if I'm going to give you $20 million a year, I want a piece. I want some private equity now. And you're seeing the University of Utah do that. The Big Ten tried to negotiate a private equity deal that would cover all the schools. So those conversations are going on all over the place because we've got to get to a point where we have some sort of fiscal discipline and sustainability over time. And that's what donors now are starting to complain about. Like, you keep hitting me up and this money's just going into some bottomless pit that every year you're siphoning away. You want me to write a check for 10 grand every year to support my school. And I don't know where it's going. It's going to pay for some spoiled kid who, when I played, and former players are the toughest to get because they're like, well, why should I be paying them to play?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it really is when you start looking at paying someone's salary and it doesn't feel the same way as it does when, again, you're buying something or paying for something tangible that you see the value to that program year after year. And to your point, it's a one-off, right? Versus a salary, you got to come back with that every year, whether it's for the same kid or it's, hey, that kid left and now we got to pay this new kid. And it's obviously different levels too when you're talking about at a Penn State level, and then you start talking about a mid-major, or you're talking about a team that's not in the Power Five. It becomes a totally different animal where you don't have maybe the same access to that size donors, and then you're competing within your league to, hey, this school's got this budget, and that's why they can get player X and we can't. And if we just had $30,000 more, then that would allow us to be in the same ballpark as these other teams in terms of recruiting, and then that would allow us to win. It just feels like a never-ending cycle where at some point, I think your ROI comment, Jay, is 100% on point, because at some point people got to look around and go, where's our money going and what is it doing not only for the university, but what's it doing for us? It used to feel like you were doing good, right? If you were donating to your school or donating to your athletic department. And now it feels more like you're just kind of contributing to this wild west that we have in college athletics, which doesn't feel the same as contributing to the library. Let's put it that way.
No, I mean, you're dealing with the guy that just keeps coming back to you to borrow money. And it's like, oh, don't worry. And like you said, the ROI thing it's real. And I've spent some time with people politically because I've done some things politically over time. And it's no different than when you go out and try and get people to contribute to a political campaign. They want to see a pathway to victory because it's not because they like you. It's because if you win, you can do something for them if you're in political office. And it's no different with this. Now you're at the point where, coaches are going to get fired because they can't raise money because donors are going to say, well, he's been here X number of years. He can't beat this team or whatever it may be. So why would I give money knowing that we're just going to continue to be frustrated? And it's just, or it's going to be, if I give this money, I want to be sitting in the national championship game, or I want my team at the Final Four every year. And if not, then I'm going to stop giving you money. And it'll go beyond wins and losses and championships. It's going to be, I'm giving you I'm giving you $7 million a year to help cover your payroll. I need something else. I need some other kind of return investment. I think that's where private equity's probably going to happen. Again, it's not something I want to see, but until we get our business model and fiscal house is in order. And like I said, I'm at Penn State. We're not, we're top 10 in revenues. We are feeling the crunch.
All right, let's drop down to a more personal level for this question. When you think about your time as a coach in a locker room and how, I don't know if difficult is the right word, but just the challenge of putting together a team, getting guys like we talked about earlier to be on the same page, to all be rowing the boat in the same direction. And now you not only have the challenge of just doing that with, in the case of a football team, 95 individuals, but now you also have this money, this salary, this piece of, hey, this guy's getting this amount of money, my teammate's making this, or this guy's making more than me and I'm out producing him. And not only am I ahead of him on the depth chart, but we got all these. How do you envision, or can you even kind of put yourself into that kind of locker room and what the challenges must be like to try to deal with it? I always think, again, I look at it through the lens of my experience, both as a coach, and I haven't coached on the collegiate level, but just as a high school coach, and then also my time as a player, as a college athlete. And I know the dynamics of a locker room and how challenging those were when you didn't have the money piece of it involved. I can't even imagine how challenging it is with the money part of it being so prevalent now. So how do you kind of envision, if you could throw yourself back into the locker room, how do you manage that, or how do coaches today try to manage that?
Well, I think what you got to do is you got to almost like when I coached for Joe, he had a blue line. And when you crossed that blue line into practice, you were supposed to be 100% focused on that because you couldn't do anything about a test you failed or a girlfriend issue, whatever it may be. And he told us to put those lines everywhere in our lives. So we crossed into a classroom, whatever it was. I think what has to happen is you have to essentially construct that same idea. When you walk in the locker room, okay, and when you walk in the football building, the money stuff has got to be out there. You got to come in here and you can't gripe about this guy getting more money. If you want to have that conversation, you want to gripe, you handle that away from the building, theoretical building. And obviously, your coach's office is in the same building often, but you get the point. When you get into football stuff, it's got to be only football. If you don't think you're getting paid or whatever, come complain to me, but don't complain in the locker room. Don't make it about this. I know when the NIL stuff first started, before Oregon was in the Big Ten, because of relationships I had with Phil Knight and some people out there, we were comparing notes as to how they were handling NIL stuff with their collectives as we were building ours and they were building theirs. And one of the conversations was Mario Cristobal was at Oregon at the time. And they were going to have to get more money for a quarterback they were recruiting than a really, really good starting offensive tackle they had. And Mario Cristobal was rightfully like, why is this guy getting more money than this guy who's my starting left tackle? And it was like, because this quarterback can command more money because there are more people bidding on him. So even coaches have to get their head around certain things. And I think one of the things that's happening at the college level is they're creating a GM, they're creating some of these positions so that the professionalization and the money part can be taken away from the head coach. And now the coach can just say, look, you got a problem, go over there. And I think that's the best way to handle it. You got a problem, go over there. Now, that requires the coach to have somebody in that position that they trust beyond everything. I mean, it's got to be somebody that it can't be your best buddy because you trust him. It's got to be not only a guy you trust, but a person. I shouldn't say guy, because there are probably a lot of women out there that are a lot smarter with this stuff than men ever will be. But it's got to be a person that you trust and is beyond competent. They got to be really good because they're almost as important right now as anybody you got. because you have a salary cap, because you have NIL deals. So I think that's the way you got to handle it. You got to learn to separate and compartmentalize those two things. Because if you don't, and that's in your locker room, it's going to be a problem. And I know going back, guys I know the coach in the SEC, when there were bags getting thrown around, bags of cash, the kids would brag about how much cash they got. Next thing you know, the kids complain to the coach about, hey, this guy got X amount of dollars. Why don't I get that? And that created a lot of locker room problems. Now, they couldn't talk about it because they weren't supposed to be doing it. So it's a little different dynamic now.
Yeah, but that's a really great point, Jay. I love that idea of sort of the separation, right? You take, hey, I'm the head football coach. I'm coaching football, and if you want to talk about the money side of it, the business side of it, here's my business manager, my finance manager, my NIL director, whatever it is, and that person goes and handles that. And once you step across that proverbial blue line, like you said, now suddenly we have it separated. I think that's a great way. I know there's some schools that have already obviously had, people they have whole departments dedicated to being able to figure this stuff out. And, again, the more resources your school has, obviously the easier it is for you to be able to put some of those positions in place. And football, especially at the big revenue schools like a Penn State, compared to some of the smaller basketball schools where you have a smaller roster, smaller coaching staff, that stuff's more of a challenge to be able to do that. But I do think that that's the direction eventually that we're going to have to head as we start to figure out what this thing looks like, right? And the map starts to get drawn of, well, we got to handle this and we got to handle this. And it starts to, again, we narrow down that focus of this is what ultimately the system's going to look like. And it'll be very, very interesting over the next 5 years to see how this thing develops and hopefully some of the conversations that you talked about that you're able to have as a member of the board of trustees with university presidents and athletic directors and coaches, that those conversations will continue to move us in a direction where we end up with a place where it's beneficial for everybody. The schools can still continue to educate their student athletes, where the student athletes can protect themselves, earn a little money, which certainly they have earned the right to do over the course of time of college athletics. And yet it's not just a complete free for all like it feels like in some ways that we have today. So we can't solve all the problems today, Jay, but I think we did a pretty good job of at least figuring a few things out. But I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your books and just tell us, just how you got the ideas. And again, that you're writing kind of from a novel point of view, but obviously a lot of truth based in it. So just tell us a little bit about the books and where people can get them.
Yeah, well, the book I have out now is called BLITZED, and the all out pressure of college football's current era. And really, what it came down to was this: I had written a book about my dad 10, 11 years ago, and once I did that, someone said you ought to write about what goes on in college football, because I would sit around, I'd tell guys stories, and I wouldn't tell what schools they were, but I would say, "Oh, this happened." That and like they couldn't believe it. These are guys that are longtime college football fans, guys I've known forever. They said, "You ought to write a book." So I started to sit down and write this book, and then I realized I got to write this. I can't write this as a nonfiction book because somebody at this school is going to blow my house up, or somebody at that school, or so, yeah, and lawyers are going to be involved. So I created a novel. There was a book called Primary Colors, which was ostensibly written about the Clinton campaign, but it was written as a novel. And that's kind of the idea I used when I wrote the book Hot Seat. I said it at Ohio State because I'd recruited that state for 17 years and had a lot of familiarity with that, and gotten to know Tressel really well, Urban Meyer really well. So I knew a lot of the ins and outs so I said at Ohio State to get it away from me just being a Penn State writer, writing about Penn State. And when that book was done, and it basically took you through a year of this coach who was told, if you don't win this year, you're done. Like, I can't keep the trustees away anymore. The president says you got 1 year to win. And it was this constant conflict and a tension between his ethics and what it was going to take to win. And do I do this? And do I buy this recruit? Do I not buy this recruit? So it's really, but they were all it was all real stories, what I called nonfiction fiction. So I took real stories and put them into this novel. Well, when that book was done, people started saying, well, what comes next? And by that point, we were the landscape and the business model, the entire model of college football had changed so much that I had already been consulting on NIL stuff for a couple of years. So I was familiar with what was going on all over the country, talked to different coaches, talked to people that were talking to people, talked to ADs. So I have a number of things that are real that are happening right now. And I put them in a book now called Blitzed, which takes you through that same coach at Ohio State. And now it takes you into transfer portal, the money, the demands, agents, this school versus that school, kids just, lying to your face, but also a good chunk of it, of the mental health aspect that no one talks about with the NIL is these players now have to adult. At 18 years old now, they've got to deal with agents, attorneys, accountants, all these things. They've got family members that are saying, I know you love at this school, but you got to go to this school and make this kind of money. And you can make more money. And they're getting all this kind of pressure and the pressure to go out and be on social media after a tough game. And when the minute you step out after a tough game on social media, avalanche of just brutal criticism. We did not prepare kids for this well enough at all. And that was one of the things the group I consulted with kept saying to schools, like, look, it's great that you want to give them financial literacy and all this stuff. You better help them prepare for what's coming, because they've got to go out and say, oh, after every game, I drink Gatorade or whatever it may be. And people go, well, you sucked, you threw an interception, all that kind of stuff. So all that comes in, as well as the mental health of the coach now, because your coach now is on the clock 24/7, because it's unrestricted free agency every year for your entire team. USC, you're saying, oh, we like to announce that our quarterback re-signed with us. And you just go, what have we come to? So all that is in this book, and it takes a whether you're a college football fan, basketball fan, whatever it may be, it takes you into that world of the pressure that these guys are dealing with now, every day, all day. And there's a point where the coach in this book, his wife and some people finally get him and say, look, you need to start talking to somebody. And he's, it's like The Sopranos where, Tony Soprano's talking to a shrink. It's not to that point, but, you got, and the person that his advisor says, look, when you and your wife go to the beach for a week in the summer, you need to put someone in charge in the office and turn your phone off for 2 days. And he's like, I can't do that. And it's like, if it's a big enough emergency, we'll find you. Other than that, and like it takes you through all those pressures that these guys have. So it's really a good inside look at what, if you are a guy that has a kid that's going to play big time college sports, it's important for them to understand what they're getting into. And that's in the book too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that people outside of the college athletic world have no idea what goes on the inside, both from the perspective of a coach, from the perspective of an athlete. I always think about coaches, and again, their livelihood, right, depends on 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids performing at their absolute best. And I think when any of us who are the age that you and I are, when we look back at ourselves at 18, 19, 20 years old, I'm not sure anybody should have been relying on me, at least for their livelihood. Certainly,
especially if I had that money in my pocket.
That's right.
I look back and go, I was 18 and someone was giving me $500,000 to play football. Look out. Like, that's not a good that's a bad combination.
It is not. I was so excited I always used to say over winter break, we'd get like $300 for meal money when I was living in the apartment. And so every year I'd be like, all right, I can live on $150 of this, and I could always go out and buy myself a pair of shoes with some of that money. And I could not have been more excited to have gotten that whatever extra 100. And it wasn't extra. It was just maybe I skipped a meal every day so I could buy myself a pair of shoes or whatever. And I think about how excited I was. I can't even imagine what an 18 or 19-year-old kid going through and getting the kind of money that some of the kids are getting. And obviously not everybody's at the top of the pay scale, but I mean, heck, if I was getting $5,000, that would have seemed unbelievable to me when I was 19 years old. It would have been incredible. So who knows? All right. Anyway, before we get out, Jay, I want to give you a chance to share. How can people connect with you, find out more about what you're doing, share website, social media, whatever you feel comfortable with. And then after you do that, I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Okay. Website, jvpaterno.com, Jay, the letter V, paterno.com. on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now, at J Paterno, my full name, Jay Paterno. Instagram is at JV Paterno, JAYV Paterno. And all those places. And the books, you can get them on Amazon, you get them on my website as well, and wherever you buy books. So all those things, and certainly the website, you can keep track of me. I'm always got blogs, got videos, got all kinds of stuff, news, that kind of stuff. Anything I'm doing, anything I'm writing is all on there as well.
Jay, cannot thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule tonight to join us. It was a lot of fun talking college athletics with you. Glad we got a chance to spend some time together. To everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. Your first impression is everything when applying for a new coaching job. A professional coaching portfolio is the tool that highlights your coaching achievements and philosophies, and most of all, helps separate you and your abilities from the other applicants. The Coaching Portfolio Guide is an instructional, membership-based website that helps you develop a personalized portfolio. Each section of the Portfolio Guide provides detailed instructions on how to organize your portfolio in a professional manner. The guide also provides sample documents for each section of your portfolio that you can copy, modify, and add to your personal portfolio. As a Hoopheads Pod listener, you can get your Coaching Portfolio Guide for just $25. Visit coachingportfolioguide.com/hoopheads to learn more.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.